You are walking through a damp, freezing forest in what will eventually be called Germany. It is 40,000 years ago. The air smells like wet pine, crushed ferns, and wood smoke, and sitting across the fire from you is someone who looks almost exactly like you but not quite. Their brow is heavier, casting a permanent shadow over their eyes. Their chest is barrel-shaped, built to house massive lungs. Their nose is wide and projecting, an evolutionary radiator built to warm freezing air before it hits their delicate tissue. You lock eyes. The firelight catches the strange, familiar geometry of their face. And here's what is actually happening. You're not looking at a different species. You are looking at a geographical variant of your own family tree, and the entire narrative of human history is about to be rewritten by a handful of geneticists and a very loud group of paleoanthropologists who think we have been lied to for over a century. Most educational videos will tell you that you share roughly 2% of your DNA with these people, that they were a separate evolutionary branch, and that they went extinct because we were smarter, faster, or more socially advanced. They will show you a clean linear diagram of human evolution where one branch dies out and the other marches forward to invent the iPhone. But that clean diagram is a comfortable fiction. The reality is a messy, chaotic web of assimilation, ghost genetics, and a morphological rebellion that questions the very definition of what a species actually is. Before we descend into the genetic clean rooms and the fragmented fossil record, I need to ask you something. If you found out today that the person you consider the most fundamentally different from you on the planet was actually just a regional variant of your exact same family, how would that change the way you look at the stranger sitting next to you on the subway? Drop your answer in the comments, because the definition of what makes us human is about to get very messy, and I want to know where you draw the line. Let us talk about the species problem, because here's the thing nobody tells you about biology. The concept of a species is not a hard physical law like gravity. It is a human invention. It is a filing system we created to organize the chaos of the natural world, and when you apply it to deep time, the filing system completely breaks down. The standard definition you learn in school is the biological species concept, which states that a species is a group of organisms that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. By that exact definition, if Homo sapiens and Neanderthals mated and produced children who went on to have their own children, they are the same species. End of story. But here's where it gets interesting. Jeffrey Schwartz, a prominent paleoanthropologist at the University of Pittsburgh, has spent his career looking at the actual bones, not just the computer models. He has seen and studied almost every specimen of the entire human fossil record, and he notes that Neanderthals are clearly morphologically unique. They have an occipital bun at the back of their skull. They have a supraorbital torus, a massive brow ridge that we completely lack. Their inner ear canals are shaped differently. Their teeth have specific root structures that do not match ours. Schwartz argues that you cannot just wave away thousands of years of distinct morphological divergence just because some fragmented DNA managed to cross a reproductive barrier. This brings us to the first major people also asked question that dominates the internet. Were Neanderthals and Homo sapiens actually the same species? The honest answer is that it depends entirely on which anthropologist you ask and which definition of species they are using to secure their grant funding. If you use the phylogenetic species concept, which defines a species by its unique shared physical traits and evolutionary lineage, they are absolutely different species. They look different, they move different. According to Schwartz, they probably smelled different. But if you use the genetic introgression model, they are just two deeply intertwined populations of the same hominin stream. We are trapped in a semantic war, and the bones are caught in the middle. Let us take a step back and look at the full picture of how we even know they interbred in the first place. Because the story of the Neanderthal genome is one of the most obsessive, painstaking scientific endeavors in human history. It starts in 1997 when a team led by Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig managed to extract a tiny fragment of mitochondrial DNA from the original Neanderthal specimen found in the Neander Valley. Extracting ancient DNA is not like swabbing your cheek. It is a forensic nightmare. DNA degrades over time. It breaks into tiny fragmented pieces. It gets chewed up by bacteria, and worst of all, it gets contaminated. The moment a paleoanthropologist touches a 40,000-year-old bone, they leave their own modern human DNA all over it. To solve this, Pääbo and his team had to build ultra-sterile clean rooms, essentially creating a biological cleanroom environment that rivals the facilities used to build microchips. They wore full body suits, scrubbed every surface with bleach and ultraviolet light, and developed entirely new computational algorithms just to separate the ancient hominin signal from the modern human noise and the bacterial static. By 2010, they had published the first draft of the full Neanderthal nuclear genome, and when they compared it to modern human genomes from around the world, they found a shocking truth. People of non-African descent carry between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA. The narrative was set. We met them in the Middle East or Europe. We mated with them. We absorbed their genes and then they vanished. But here's something that genuinely surprises most people. There's a massive glaring hole in this genetic narrative, and it is the exact reason why some researchers believe the entire interbreeding story is built on a foundation of missing data. This leads us directly to the second most searched question on the web. Did Neanderthals and early humans really interbreed, or is the DNA evidence fundamentally flawed? Jeffrey Schwartz does not doubt that Pabo and his group are brilliant technicians. He does not doubt that the sequences they extracted are free of modern contamination. What he doubts is the interpretation of what that DNA actually belongs to. Here's the problem. Dozens of different hominin species once walked the earth. Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo floresiensis, the Denisovans, and countless other fragmentary groups that we do not even have names for yet. But scientists have only successfully sequenced the genomes of 3 specimens whose species they could clearly and definitively identify by their physical morphology: modern Homo sapiens, the Neander Valley Neanderthal, and a 400,000-year-old hominin called Homo heidelbergensis. Think about what that means. We have a genetic library with only 3 books in it, but we're trying to identify the authors of a library that contains hundreds of volumes. Researchers have endeavored to identify the species of other fragmentary specimens primarily using genetic clues derived from those 3 definitively identified fossils. They find a bone, they sequence the DNA, and they say, well, this DNA looks like the Neanderthal DNA we already have, so this bone must be a Neanderthal. Schwartz argues that this is circular reasoning, because we do not know how many hominin species there actually were, and because the vast majority of them have not had their DNA sequenced, we cannot possibly know how many of these ancient hominins had genes that were specifically Neanderthal. The DNA sequences extracted from the bones might not be exclusive to Neanderthals at all. They might just be ancient ancestral ghost DNA genetic baggage left over from a common ancestor that lived 500,000 years ago, shared by dozens of different hominin groups that we haven't even discovered yet. Therefore, Schwartz argues, the evidence that the sequenced DNA is specific to Neanderthals is unreliable, which makes the definitive claims about interbreeding highly dubious. He is not saying the DNA sequences are wrong. He is saying the conclusion that it was definitely Neanderthals mating with Homo sapiens is not as solid as the textbooks claim. We are about to cross the halfway point of this descent, right into the most controversial genetic data of 2026. If you're the kind of person who prefers the messy truth over the clean textbook version of history, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with 3 friends who still think Neanderthals were just grunting cavemen. Let us keep digging, because even if we accept the genetic evidence, even if we assume that the DNA in your body really did come from the specific group of hominins we call Neanderthals, the way we imagine that interaction is completely wrong. Pop culture has conditioned us to view ancient encounters through the lens of modern conquest. We imagine a violent clash, a brief opportunistic mating in the dark, and then the dominant species wiping out the inferior one. But the genomic data tells a radically different, much more intimate story. This brings us to the third major question people ask. What did social interaction and mating between Neanderthals and humans actually look like? To answer this, we have to look at a groundbreaking genomic study published in Nature in late 2024 and early 2025 by researchers like A.P. Sumer. For years, the assumption was that interbreeding happened in a relatively short, concentrated window when modern humans first migrated out of Africa and encountered Neanderthal populations in the Levant or Europe. But the new genomic constraints reveal something mind-blowing. The genetic exchange was not a brief evolutionary fling. It was a massive, continuous window of gene flow that lasted for roughly 7,000 years. 7,000 years. To put that in perspective, 7,000 years is the entire span of recorded human civilization. It is the time from the invention of writing in Mesopotamia to the smartphone in your hand right now. For a period of time that long, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals were not just passing each other in the forest, they were living alongside each other, sharing landscapes, sharing technologies, and continuously mixing their gene pools. This was not a violent conquest. This was a 7,000-year-long roommate phase. It implies a level of social integration, trade, and cultural exchange that completely shatters the primitive caveman stereotype. They were likely sharing hunting grounds, exchanging knowledge about local flora and fauna, and forming complex social alliances. The introgressed alleles, the specific Neanderthal genes that survived in our genome, were not just random accidents of reproduction. Many of them were actively selected for because they provided a survival advantage. Neanderthals had lived in Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years. They had genetic adaptations for cold climates, for local pathogens, for different ultraviolet light levels. When Homo sapiens arrived, mating with the locals was the fastest, most efficient way to acquire the biological software needed to survive in a harsh alien environment. But here's where the social dynamics get even more specific and slightly more uncomfortable. A fascinating study published in Science and Nature in 2026 dove deep into the mechanics of this 7,000-year integration. Looking specifically at sex-biased gene flow, by analyzing the distribution of Neanderthal DNA on the X chromosome versus the autosomes, the researchers discovered a stark pattern. The interbreeding heavily favored male Neanderthals and female Homo sapiens. Why does this matter? Because in anthropology, mating patterns tell you everything about social structure. If the gene flow is heavily biased toward one sex, it usually indicates a specific type of social organization, often related to patrilocality or matrilocality, where one sex stays in their birth group while the other migrates to join a new tribe. It suggests that Neanderthal males were integrating into Homo sapiens social groups, or that Homo sapiens female groups were absorbing Neanderthal males. It points to complex, long-term social integration, arranged alliances, and recognized social bonds, rather than just violent opportunism or the spoils of war. Yet this genetic intimacy crashes directly into the morphological reality we discussed earlier. Remember Jeffrey Schwartz's argument about the smell test? He points out that Neanderthals did not look like us, we did not look like them, and they would not have moved the same way we did. Their biomechanics, driven by their robust skeletal structure, would have given them a completely different gait, and crucially, they probably smelled different than we do. Pheromones and body odor are deeply tied to the major histocompatibility complex, a group of genes that governs the immune system and heavily influences mate selection in mammals. If their immune systems and their diets were vastly different, their biological scent profiles would have been alien to a Homo sapiens. So how do you reconcile the two? How do you explain 7,000 years of continuous socially integrated mating between two groups that morphologically and chemically should have found each other completely alien? The answer lies in the sheer overwhelming pressure of survival in the Pleistocene. When you are facing ice age winters, apex predators, and calorie scarcity, the biological boundaries of physical attraction become secondary to the absolute necessity of group cohesion and genetic diversity. They might have looked different, they might have smelled different, but they spoke the same language of survival, and in the brutal arithmetic of the Paleolithic, that was the only aphrodisiac that mattered. This brings us to the final, most persistent question that haunts every documentary about human evolution. Why did Homo sapiens survive while Neanderthals went extinct? The premise of the question is fundamentally flawed. It assumes a zero-sum game. It assumes that for one species to thrive, the other must be eradicated. We love this narrative because it feeds our modern ego. It allows us to view ourselves as the undisputed champions of the evolutionary arena, the ones who outsmarted, outhunted, and outcompeted the brutes. We imagine a war of attrition where our superior language skills, our complex projectile weapons, and our larger social networks slowly choked the Neanderthals out of existence until the last one died, shivering in a cave in Gibraltar. But the genomic data, the 7,000-year continuous mating window, and the morphological evidence all point to a completely different mechanism. They did not go extinct. They were absorbed. Think about the population dynamics of the Pleistocene. Homo sapiens migrating out of Africa likely arrived in much larger, more densely packed waves. Neanderthal populations, adapted to harsh, low-density environments, were likely much smaller, spread incredibly thin across vast territories of Europe and Asia. When a massive, expanding population encounters a much smaller, localized population, and they are capable of interbreeding, the smaller population does not necessarily get wiped out by violence. It gets swallowed by mathematics. It is called assimilation. Over thousands of years, as the two groups continuously intermarried, shared resources, and blended their cultures, the distinct Neanderthal morphological traits simply diluted into the massive Homo sapiens gene pool. The barrel chests, the heavy brows, the occipital buns, they were slowly bred out, not because they were inferior, but because they were numerically overwhelmed. The Neanderthals did not lose the game of life. They just became us. Their DNA is sitting in your cells right now, regulating your immune system, affecting your hair texture, influencing your risk for certain diseases. They are not a ghost species. They are a foundational pillar of modern humanity. Let us zoom out one final time and look at the full picture. The entire messy concept of a species is just a snapshot of a single moment in a continuous flowing river of biology. We draw hard lines on the evolutionary tree because our brains demand categories, because we need to know who is us and who is them. But nature does not care about our filing systems. Nature only cares about the flow of genetic information, the relentless drive to adapt, to survive, and to propagate. The story of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals is not a story of replacement. It is a story of synthesis. It is a story of two ancient lineages, separated by hundreds of thousands of years of geographical isolation, meeting in the freezing forests of Eurasia and deciding through the slow, grinding mechanism of natural selection and social integration that they were stronger together than apart. The morphological rebellion led by paleoanthropologists like Schwartz is a vital reminder that we must not let the dazzling magic of genetic sequencing blind us to the physical reality of the bones. But the genetic data is an equally vital reminder that our ancestors were far more adaptable, far more socially complex, and far more intimate with their environment than we ever gave them credit for. You are walking through a damp, freezing forest in what will eventually be called Germany. It is 40,000 years ago. The air smells like wet pine and wood smoke, and sitting across the fire from you is someone who looks almost exactly like you, but not quite. You lock eyes. But this time, you do not see a different species. You do not see a competitor, and you do not see a brute. You see a cousin, a partner, and a vital piece of the puzzle that eventually leads to you sitting here, thousands of generations later, watching a screen and wondering where you came from. We get cold, we get creative, we get scared, and then we reach across the fire and pull the stranger into our family tree.